All right. Welcome, everyone. If you haven't been to one of our crash course webinars before, we keep these to about 25 minutes. I'll stick around afterwards to answer questions and have a discussion, but we want to get you in and out of here quickly. Today's topic, we're going to dive into flipping the script, going from utility data collection, particularly focused on triple net leased assets, turning that into a competitive advantage. Let's dive in. All right. So, if you are in sustainability for a triple net lease portfolio, this is likely to look pretty familiar. The status quo for a lot of portfolios is to ask their tenants for utility bills so that they can report to GRESB, so that they can report to benchmarking frameworks for their own internal purposes, what have you. But because the tenants pay the bills, they own that data. It's often up to property management to kind of chase them down. There are some utility jurisdictions that will provide whole building aggregate data, but you often need a letter of authorization from the tenants. This is an actual quote from a leading industrial landlord. They send 6,000 emails a year to get 40% of their tenants to sign an LOA, ultimately just to get 2.4% data coverage across the portfolio. So bottom line, the status quo is not working, right? If we look at GRESB data coverage stats for industrial, for example, there was a big uptick in 2024, but still only at 52% for energy, 37% for water. It's just not working. It's keeping GRESB scores down, and it has sustainability teams focused on the wrong things, right? Just on data collection, aggregation, entry, and benchmarking, not on the drivers that are actually going to lead to decarbonization and achieving the real goals. Meanwhile, and I don't know if anyone's as nerdy as me, but I read through a lot of sustainability reports put out by triple net leased portfolios, and tenant engagement comes up over and over and over again. This is an area of focus. It's a critical initiative for a lot of portfolios. But the tools in place to do so are often failing them. We hear that sustainability teams don't even really know who to talk to at a lot of these tenant occupier companies. The only contact that they have is someone in accounts payable, and they really want to be driving a partnership and driving some asset optimization, some decarbonization initiatives, but they can't get to the right person. Why, right? Where's the disconnect? When it comes to asking for basically them to do homework, it sounds like to them, share your bills or sign this LOA, fill out this survey. It's important for us. The subtext is there's nothing in it for you. And there's often some urgency here, right? The property managers are put in this awkward position. They say, not only do we need you to do this for us, there's nothing in it for you, and we need it yesterday. So both sustainability teams and property management companies are, sometimes tenants will comply. Oftentimes, sometimes they will refuse to do this, but the vast majority just ignore this type of stuff because they don't get any value out of it. The big irony here is that the tenants, the Fortune 500 tenants that are, they take up the most amount of space. They sign the longest leases. They have the lowest risk. They have very aggressive net zero goals that they are trying to achieve. Many of them have specifically stated that they do not plan to do this through offsets or purchasing RECs. So the irony that landlords are trying to extract this utility information while tenants are trying to figure out how to decarbonize their operations is it's blatantly ironic. In triple net, there's historically been a split incentive problem where investments made by the landlord flow down to the tenant. So what's the incentive for the landlord to make these investments? Our argument here is that split incentive is going away as landlords, particularly those who submit to GRESB, have an incentive to increase data coverage. They also have an incentive to support their biggest, most valuable tenants in their own initiatives. And that's what we're going to talk about primarily today. So it's important to think about, their net zero goals, but I also want to bring up a really, really wild example. DHL had a statement on their website that they were only going to lease buildings that were already net zero. So think, probably electrified and has on-site renewable energy, or those that had a credible strategy to getting net zero. They said they're only going to lease these types of spaces, and they've since removed that policy. We're under the assumption that they simply couldn't find enough space that met this criteria. From our perspective, this is a huge market opportunity for any landlord that could deliver, if not a fully net zero building, the tools to help them get there. So in addition to thinking about their net zero targets for operations, it's also important to realize that, this is a increasingly important factor in leasing decisions. And the fact that they removed this policy, I don't think is a sign that they are less interested in their sustainability objectives. I think it's more a reflection of the lack of available product in the marketplace today. Okay, so we've set the context. How can we adjust the approach? How can we flip the script and go from chasing to delivering value? First, let's lay out what the options for data collection are today. You could get tenant utility bills. You could either have them email it to you and pay a consultant to like manually enter those into Energy Star or whatever other tool, or they could submit it to a software platform that can scrape these bills. In some utility jurisdictions, like I mentioned, you can get data directly from the utility. You often need letters of authorization. This is a great option. However, there are situations, like the data is going to come in usually once a year. We've also heard and seen cases of inaccuracies there. You can do manual meter reads. A lot of industrial assets struggle to do this because, there's one property manager for every 30 or 50 assets, and it's just not feasible. Or you could shadow meter, and this is basically applying supplemental metering and sensors for electric, water, and gas to capture the data directly, the same data that's being read by the utilities can be directly captured for the landlord. All of these strategies have their place, right? There's pros and cons to each of them. And many portfolios use a a variety of these. But today I'm going to focus on shadow metering because it's distinct in that the data that you receive is real time, and this matters. And I'll dive into why. So when we're thinking specifically about this topic, about flipping the script and going from chasing tenants to providing value, shadow metering is unique of all those options. And I'll show you what real-time data can mean for a tenant. So here's a real world example. There's a Fortune 500 occupier. I'm under confidentiality. I can't say the name, but if you saw it, you would immediately think of, a technological innovator. They have strong net zero commitments. They were exposed to shadow metering and real-time data via their landlord, who deploy the shadow metering to increase their data coverage and risk scores. And in the process, we found out that the sustainability team for this corporate occupier, not only do they have to work off of utility bill data, so one data point a month, but they don't even see that data until 3 months in arrears, because it first goes through accounts payable and it eventually gets to them. So they're basically unable to do their job from any optimization standpoint, or from measuring and verifying any of the investments that they make. They are flying blind while desperately racing towards this aggressive net zero commitment. They along with Enertiv, were able to identify $350,000 worth of savings because of the real-time data. And I'm gonna talk about the different methodologies and strategies that can be used. But this highlights just how desperate tenants are for services around this topic. They don't have the tools in place to reach the goals that they've set out, and landlords, because of GRES reporting, because of benchmarking rules, are now incentivized to not only do data collection but provide tenants with value as a byproduct. So how can we do this? What are the specific strategies, right? Let's get into the meat of how this actually works. The first one is meter analytics. So at a high level, these are insights. These are prescriptive recommendations based on that interval data, right? You could never do this with utility bill data. It's just not granular enough. But in terms of granularity, this is an important distinction to make. It's possible to monitor at the equipment level, and you can deliver much better and more accurate, higher value insights when you have that level of granularity. But this immediately introduces the split incentive problem. Why would a landlord make the extra investment to not just capture data at the tenant space level or at the whole building level, but go down to the equipment? They would not want to make that, landlords would not want to make that additional investment. So with meter data, or with interval data at the meter level, combined with a digital equipment inventory. So meaning make, model, tonnage, horsepower, date of manufacture for the equipment on site, combined with, tenant space level data and distribution panel level data, you can deliver these basically 80% of the specificity of the insights for a fraction of the cost. And this is the strategy that the vast majority of at least the use cases that we see are doing. Now, if the tenant wanted to invest further in more granular monitoring, they are welcome to do so. But the point here is with the data captured for, just utility data collection purposes for reporting, and a digital equipment inventory, you can turn around and deliver very, very specific insights. And because the data is real time, you can track you can measure and verify those savings both on a cumulative and an annualized basis. So it doesn't have to be theoretical. These savings can be very, very transparent, provided through a tenant portal to the tenants. The other thing to note here is that these don't have to be drastic, right? A lot of industrial tenants, they run 24/7, and they care much more about their uptime than they do about optimization. Some don't care about their carbon emissions at all. But a big point here is that the changes don't have to be drastic. Small adjustments to schedules and set points and peak loads and high idling loads and other things can have a big impact. They can add up significantly. Another way this real-time interval data can be translated into value is with demand response. So these aren't really savings. What's happening here is that in certain utilities will pay cash, 5 to 15% of annual spend. So, for some industrial tenants, that can be tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars for enrolling in the program. And the program is just to be on call in case the utility needs you to modulate your load. In practice, those who enroll operate as normal 99.7% of the time. And even if they don't comply, there are no penalties. They might get kicked out of the program eventually, but there are no penalties, right? There's very little risk here. When tenants are approached with this and they're unfamiliar with demand response, it almost sounds too good to be true. You mean we can get paid a bunch of cash for doing mostly nothing? Yes. So imagine the difference between the conversation of, can you please send us your utility bills versus, hey, did you know that you could be getting paid $100,000 a year for enrolling in this program? It completely changes the narrative there. In a similar vein, there are deregulated markets, some natural gas, some electric, some both. Some tenants will already have energy procurement brokers, some won't, and they'll get their supply from the utility company. When they do have a broker in place, the truth is that 99% of brokers are small mom and pop shops, and the way they operate is they sign their clients up on a 12-year fixed rate contract, 12-month fixed rate contract. At month 11, they'll call up again and say it's time to renew your contract, and they'll lock their client into whatever rate is available at the time. The truth is that rates can be tracked daily, right? And halfway through that 12-month term, you could say, hey, these are the best rates we've seen in a while. You can lock in this today's rate at the end of your contract. There are also methods where you can float your rate, which often saves you a bunch of money, or you can blend it, where you can decide your risk tolerance. Do you want floating rates that save you money but could spike? Do you want to fix your cost? Do you want to go half and half? These are conversations that are much more interesting to tenants than please send your bills, right? Because it involves reliability, which they really care about, and it involves spend, which they really care about. So those are the big three strategies that we're seeing being employed today. It's worth mentioning that some landlords are installing solar and basically selling a power purchase agreement to their tenants with a lower fixed rate cost via on-site solar. The truth is that from at least what we've seen, the differences in lease length terms, hold periods for the owner, and then the solar contract term, there's a lot of misalignment there. It's very hard to get those things aligned and agreed upon. We're seeing solar mostly deployed in the markets that have either net metering programs or community solar. Community solar, you can basically lease out your roof and get another 50 cents to $1 per square foot just for leasing out the roof. So it ends up being more of a landlord benefit, but it is worth mentioning. But yeah, at a very high level, these are the strategies where we can flip the script. We can go from chasing to delivering value. We're coming up right at about 25 minutes. I want to leave you with a few last thoughts. When you provide value to tenants, it's much easier to justify the costs of passing down the costs of shadow metering to the tenants. If there's a obvious ROI there, it makes it much easier, not to mention you are supporting their goals if they're one of those Fortune 500s. One thing to be aware of, not all shadow metering is created equal in terms of the cost, in terms of how disruptive it is to tenants, in terms of how accessible the data is, whether you want to import it to your own data warehouse or you want to switch providers in the future. Just be aware that it's worth doing some extra research if you go down this route. GRESB and state and municipal regulators are very clearly moving from benchmarking to tracking and either incentivizing or penalizing performance and decarbonization. And you could say, yeah, we're triple net lease. If we get any fines, we'll pass them down to the tenant. But at some point, it's going to become a factor in the market, and the operating expenses for buildings that are don't support tenants in reducing their consumption and ultimate carbon emissions will be higher and be harder to lease those spaces. And again, speaking of leases, like from our perspective, this is effectively the first amenity for triple net leased assets that can attract those long-term, low-risk Fortune 500 tenants that everyone wants. All right, so that's our crash course for today. I will stick around for as long as needed to answer any questions. Hope everyone has a great day. If you have any questions in the future, feel free to reach out to me. My email is comley@enertiv.com. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.